Good afternoon, and welcome to Smithsonian Gardens. Let's Talk Gardens. This afternoon, we're going to talk about some of the plants that are so misunderstood. Weeds. Weeds have a place, and what I learned is any plant that's not in the right place is really a weed, because I have some black-eyed Susans that are all over the place. That is a terrific plant, but if it's not where you want it, well, then I do consider it to be very weedy. But we're going to learn some technical things today about weeds, how you can control them, and what they might tell you about your garden. So my name is Cindy Brown. I am the Education and Collections Manager at Smithsonian Gardens. And today we have Laurie Fox, who is a master gardener guru. I mean, he works with extension, works with the experimental station, does so much work for the master gardeners here in Virginia. And I'm very grateful for the time that she's given us to be able to share her expertise. Laurie, I don't know if you know how you were recommended to me, but the Weed Society of America, which I know it's hard to believe there's a Weed Society of America. We gave them a tour of our greenhouse a couple of weeks ago, but the Weed Society of America recommended me or you to me, and I'm thrilled to hear what you have to tell us about weeds. So everyone, as usual, please put your questions in the chat box, and I will come back on after Laurie's presentation, and I will curate the questions and share them with her so that she can answer some of your questions about weeds. But Laurie, I know you've got some great information to share with us. So why don't you go ahead and take it away? I'm going to disappear, but I won't be gone. Zach and I will be here to be able to help in case there's any kind of problems. And we will see you in about 45 minutes.
Sounds wonderful.
All right.
Yeah. Put
Take it
weed
away.
scientist, yes, put weed scientist on your business card, and it's a great conversation starter. And it's also, if you talk about weeds, it's also job security for those of us in the research and management part of the industry. So today what we're going to do is basic weed ID and management. So I tend to talk fast, so fasten your seatbelts. Nice pictures and hopefully some resources later for you and some scenarios at the end of things that you might have encountered. So here we go. So why are plants weeds? And if you read the description for the session, I quoted Sun Tzu, the great military strategist, to know your enemy is to defeat them. So we really do have to think about why is a plant a weed, because that then factors into understanding the plant and understanding how best to manage it. And I will have a discussion with Cindy about management versus control of weeds. So, because if you think you've controlled one thing, then something else invariably comes in and you start all over again. So, but basically, plants are weeds because they have competitive advantages. So some of the things that they all have in common are generally they are prolific seeders. So the more seeds that they produce, then the more potential that there is for them to become weedy. And then also the more seeds, then the higher germination rates or percentages of plants. And again, they can fill in quickly. The seeds are also dispersed widely in a variety of ways. So they could be dispersed on the air and the water, catching on the clothing and fur of animals moving through the landscape, things like that. They could be on equipment. The seeds do germinate very rapidly, followed by very rapid growth. So if it can germinate quickly and grow rapidly, then that gets it ahead of other slower plants. And then more often than not, there's multiple vegetative or propagation methods, vegetative as well as seed. So all of those things, either individually or some plants have multiple of these advantages, make it something that oftentimes becomes weeds in the landscape. So other things that could contribute to a plant being weedy, it has a tall or climbing habit, which means it can get over top of other plants and exploit the light and better utilize that resource. Oftentimes they have large opposite horizontal leaves, again, to take better advantage of sunlight and do that photosynthesis, which gives them a growing advantage. It's not only about the top of the plant, the quick roots in the bottom of the plant can exploit the soil very quickly over a large area. Again, utilizing the water and the nutrients and not leaving anything for other plants. And then oftentimes weedy plants have very dense roots, so that there's a lot of root structure that is very efficient at taking up nutrients and water. So they can get out there quickly and they can utilize the resources quickly. And then since I work for Virginia Tech, I am a scientist, had to throw in some data here, just one graph though. So, and over time, what we have found is that there is an increasing resistance to herbicides. So if we use herbicides over and over and over again to manage the weeds, eventually some of them build up a resistance, and that is not a good thing. And that's what the lines on the graph shows, that over time, and it starts like 1955 or 56 and runs through 2020 on the bottom axis. You can see over time, as we really increased our herbicide use in the 70s and 80s, now we're seeing the side effects of that with plants that are resistant to being killed with herbicides. Not a good thing. My whole philosophy is you can't make a decision on what to do about something if you don't know what you've got. So identification is key when it comes to weeds. And the way that I approach this is you start broad with broad types of groups that you put the plant into, and then eventually you get more and more specific until you've identified that particular weed. So you don't have to know anything about taxonomy or anything like that. You can do this. You can put it in like a grass or a sedge category, the narrow leaves versus something that's a broadleaf plant. You can categorize it as to whether or not it's a woody plant, like a shrub or a tree, versus something that is herbaceous, meaning it dies down to the ground, over the winter. And then there's another category: is it an aquatic weed or is it a land-based terrestrial weed? So that right there helps put it in a category and eliminate a lot of other possibilities. Then what you do is you kind of look at the life cycle of the plant. And we'll talk about life cycles and the weeds that fit into these categories a little more specifically in a few slides. But winter annuals are the ones that germinate at the end of the fall, middle to the end of the fall, as the air temperatures and soil temperatures are cooling off, and they germinate then and grow all through the winter. And this time of the year is when a lot of them are flowering and going to seed, because they're getting ready to die off as the air and soil temperatures warm up. So as those air and soil temperatures warm up, now you're coming in with the summer annual weeds. They're the ones that like the warmer temperatures to germinate. They will grow all through the spring and summer, and then they're the ones that will bloom, seed, and die out when the temperatures drop towards the fall. You have some plants that are biennial. It takes 2 growing seasons to complete their life cycle. First season, they germinate and you get vegetative growth. The second season is when they go ahead and flower and set seed, and then they die off. And then the perennials, of course, are the ones that go through their life cycle and then come back every year. And once you get it into a life cycle category, then you can start looking at trying to figure out the specific name. And there's common names, and then there's Latin or botanical names. And everybody always rolls their eye at the Latin or the botanical, but the advantage of that is there is exactly one name for one plant. With common names, and they can be used to some degree to help identify plants, but common name, one plant may have several common names. And sometimes the common names are based on where it is geographically. Somebody in the Northeast may know the plant by a certain name. Somebody here in the Mid-Atlantic region may know it by a different name. And somebody out on the West Coast may know it by yet another name. So one plant could have many names, or you could have one common name and it could refer to several different plants. So Common names are good, but if you really want to know exactly which plant you've got, the Latin or botanical name is always the best option, because that way, no matter what resource you look at or whoever you talk to, you know exactly that plant. And that's a good thing. Right, so there are different identification features that you can use if you're trying to identify a plant. And I'm going to go through all these, and then at the end, I'm going to say, well, that's all good and fine, except pull out your phone and use one of those plant ID apps, and that makes it even simpler. We talked about life cycle. We talked about habitat, or not yet. We haven't talked about habitat. We're going to. But that is where the plant grows. Is it growing in the water? Is it growing in the woods? Is it growing in your lawn? And that does make a difference, and can very quickly help you narrow down what something may or may not be. Then there's habit. How does it grow? Is it a low growing creeper? Is it an upright twining viney type habit? And that works well for identification. The leaves on the plants, and this is important because that's generally the key ID characteristic, because color comes and goes, flower comes and goes, seed comes and goes. And so the leaves are generally the key ID feature that you would look at. What are their shape? How are they arranged, on the stems? Do they have teeth on the edges? Are they variegated? Do they have a unique shape to them? All of those types of things. And we'll see some examples of this. Stems come into play because some of the weeds have round or square stems, and that's kind of a unique feature, and it's something that's easy to see, and it's a good ID characteristic. Flowers are sort of the ultimate identification feature, but again, they may or may not be on there at the time you're looking at the plant. So, but again, what shape are they? What color are they? Where are they on the plant? How big are they? That sort of thing is what you would be looking at relative to flowers. Seed are good, but unless you're, somebody that works in an herbarium or, maybe has a microscope, sometimes seed can be a challenge to use for identification. But then again, there's some plants that have very unique seed. Remember, we talked about seed dispersal mechanisms being one of the competitive advantages. So, maybe it's like a dandelion that has those little hairs on it that helps it float through the air. In that case, it could be a really a unique identification feature. And then there are the roots. Are they deep and, kind of woody, or are they shallow and very dense? Do they have a specific color to them? Do they have a specific odor to them? Those types of things you can look at. And then there's some other things. Do the plants have an odor? If you've mowed your yard and you've got wild garlic or wild onions in your turf, yes, you definitely can smell them and know that that's what they are. But there are other things like thorns or sap. Sometimes some of the weeds have like a milky, like a latex sap to them, and those can also be used for identification. So let's jump right on in. The winter annuals, again, these are the ones that you're seeing right now that are blooming and getting ready to seed out over the next month or two as we get into the spring. And what I'm going to do is cover the most common ones, the ones that I get the questions on the most, the ones that the people at the garden centers or the master gardeners get the questions on the most. So we'll look at the most common ones, because there are lots and lots of weeds out there, and we could spend all day talking about this if you really wanted to. But let's look at the most common ones. So henbit. This is one that is unique because the leaves are attached directly to the stem. There's no like little petiole. They kind of wrap around the stem. And if you look at the slide in the upper right corner, sometimes the stems have a burgundy color, not always. That's usually temperature dependent, but they are very definitely square. So this particular weed has square stems, and you can see the unique little tubular type flowers coming out, and that's what you would see now. And sometimes the leaves actually turn a little bit burgundy as well. And then if it's not in an area that is being mowed on a regular basis, on the bottom middle picture, you can see it will kind of get tall and leggy and kind of fall over in its growth habit. So that's henbit. And you'll notice I'm not doing the scientific names on these. So those are very easily found elsewhere. All right, chickweed. So this is another one that is very common in lawns, but also in landscape beds and other areas. It has sort of a medium bright green leaf to it, not quite a heart shape to the leaf. And you'll see that the leaves are arranged opposite on the stem. Look at the bottom right picture, and they have the little petioles that holds the leaf apart from the stem. When it is in bloom, it has these little white daisy-like flowers on it. And this is one, again, that's in lawns a lot because it's low growing and will tolerate being mowed. That doesn't bother it. The henbit, it will tolerate it to some degree, but it is a plant that does grow a little taller. So you're more likely to see it in the fescue or cool season grasses that you mow a little bit higher than you would in the warm season grasses that you mow lower. Right, hairy bittercress. This is a clump forming. So if you're going in to weed it, you go into the main stem and find it and pull it out. But it's a clump former, and the leaves, if you look at the bottom middle picture, that's one leaf there, but it's dissected. It's cut into little pieces. So it's kind of unique. Sometimes this is called, if you are from the South, sometimes it's called creasy greens, or just plain old cress, because other things in that are related to it have similar types of leaves. This one has a structure on it where the stem shoots up and the seeds are in these little narrow pods at the top of this stem. And this is one where you walk by and those pods tend to dry and build up pressure inside. And if somebody walks by or an animal walks by and jiggles the plant, then that pressure releases and shoots the seeds out several feet away from the plant. So that's kind of cool about this plant. And then there's annual bluegrass. It does look like a grass. It's kind of a clumper. This is a lot of times what you will see, and people will think, oh, it's nice and green and pretty, and doesn't my grass look pretty, until it starts seeding out. So it has these pale whitish green seed heads that once they start are very, very noticeable and annoying to most people. And they spread far and wide, and they stick on things like lawnmowers and weed eaters and your shoes, and then you track them around your landscape. So this is one that germinates, and it's kind of sneaky because it blends in, especially if you're doing cool season grasses, and you don't always know it's there, but it sticks out like a sore thumb if you're doing warm season grasses because they turn dormant in the winter. And so this bright green sticks out in a sort of a goldeny brown colored dormant lawn. But the way that you can tell it very quickly, if it isn't seeding, is to look at the tip of the blade, and it has what's called an awl, AWL. It's kind of cupped and pointed like the bow of a boat. And that's how you very quickly tell that it's annual bluegrass, plus the time of the year that you see it, which is now. Then there's purple dead nettle. This might look familiar because it is very closely related to the henbit that we saw earlier. But again, the leaves are on petioles. They're not directly attached to the stem. And they have this sort of wrinkly veined look to the leaves. And the stems, again, and the leaves can turn sort of this purple color, but not always. And the flowers are very, very similar to the henbit. They're sort of this purpley tubular shape to them. But that's purple dead nettle. And so those are the annual weeds. So kind of the way that when I teach, I try and do things that are kind of fun to help remember things. So you'll find some of the sayings for these weeds. So hens and chicks eat cress and turn blue and dead in the winter. And that's how you remember the most common winter annual weeds: henbit, chickweed, hairy bittercress, annual bluegrass, and purple dead nettle are all winter weeds. And don't have to write anything down because Cindy assured me this is being recorded, and you can go back and look at this and write these things down at your leisure if you would like to. So let's jump into the summer annuals. Let's start off with crabgrass. Again, another sneaky one. And again, summer annuals are germinating as your air and soil temperatures warm up. And this is a sneaky one in both your cool and warm season lawns, but it's also very sneaky in your flower gardens, in your vegetable beds, wherever, because there are quite a few species of crabgrass. And it just, I mean, you blink and it seems like it's popped up in your landscape overnight. So it's a low growing type of grass with medium sized blades and a medium green color. You'll see on the bottom picture where all the stems tend to come together, it looks kind of purpley. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes not. That's a temperature driven response. And then what happens is you have this sort of center crown of the plant, and these stems grow out, and then wherever the leaves come out on that stem, it has the ability to create roots and root itself in. So it kind of grows and creeps and roots in, and then grows and creeps some more and roots in some more. So a lot of times you will find this, if you don't catch it early, it has created this sort of patch of crabgrass. And then it has these long stems with these like fingers at the top. And along these fingers, you will see the little black seeds for the grass. And they are spread by wind, by water, and by, passing animals and people and shoestrings. Find a lot of crabgrass seeds attached to my shoestrings. Goosegrass. To me, when I learned this way back in, ancient times in school, I always thought that this particular grass looked like a goose had stepped on it. That's kind of how I remember it. It looks like somebody stepped on it and flattened it. And it has very distinctive pale green to whitish bases to the stem. It's a really strong clumper. It's not one that spreads much. And then the stems with the seeds, the fingers at the top, kind of, if you look at it, if you've ever seen a goose's footprint in the sand or in like a wet soil or something like that, you really don't see the web part. You just kind of see the vein part of it. And the seed head on the top of this grass kind of reminds me of the veining pattern of how the veins in the foot of a goose look when you see the footprint. So that's goosegrass. Japanese stilt grass. Boy, the summer annual category is loaded with grasses, right? Versus broadleafed weeds. This is one that is on the Virginia the invasive species list. This is one that is not native to the state, and it has come in and is very invasive in a lot of our natural areas. Now, this isn't one that tolerates mowing well because it likes to grow a little bit taller. That's one of the competitive advantages. It grows up very, very fast, and then it kind of falls over. And when it falls over, it creates roots at each of the points along the stem where the leaves come out. And then the roots kind of go down to the ground. And that's why it's called stilt grass. It's like the grass is walking on stilts because it's not close to the ground. And it's almost walking over top of other plants. And so as you can see, it forms these very dense thickets, and it tolerates shade really well. So that makes it, a multiple threat in our, parks and forests and wildlife refuges. Then we have mulberry weed. I'm not sure about other parts of the state, but here in Southeast Virginia, this has become a very problematic plant over the last 5 years. So this plant, it only has to be a couple inches tall before it actually starts setting seed. And it's sneaky. It likes to grow underneath other plants, and then all of a sudden it'll shoot out from underneath the cover of another plant, or it'll shoot up through the plant. And, it can grow anywhere from a couple of inches to 3 to 4 feet. It really gets into an area very quickly. It sets seed very early on in its life cycle. And you can see the seed are in the axils where the leaves attach to the stem. And the thing about this one is it's very, the stems are very brittle. So if you go to pull it up, a lot of times the stems will break off and you leave part of the stem and the root there. And really all you've done is make it mad and it comes back very, very quickly. So this is one that you have to identify it and catch it early, or know that you've had it before and look at some sort of a preventative plan of action for this type of weed. Then you have prostrate spurge, and this one hugs the ground, so it tolerates it if you're mowing an area. And this is one that if you break the stem or the leaf, has a milky sap to it. There are other spurges that grow taller, but this one is prostrate. And then occasionally you will see sort of like a reddish or a burgundy dot on the leaf. And then it's not in real good focus, but down at the bottom, you'll see where the stem was broken and you'll see that the milky sap there. So if this is one that you've got, some people can be allergic to that sort of latex type sap. It may be one that you want to wear gloves if you're trying to hand weed it out of an area. And where I would recommend wearing, like dish gloves or some sort of plastic glove as opposed to a leather glove, because the sap can soak in to a leather or a canvas glove. And you might not want that up against your skin. Plus it's really sticky. And if you've ever had it on your hands, it can be very hard to wash off. So remember, this is one that you want gloves in your management plan. So for the summer annuals, here's your little saying. Last summer, the crab and the goose used stilts to eat mulberries, which made them spurge. So again, these are your summer weeds, and you've got crabgrass and goosegrass, the Japanese stilt grass, the mulberry weed, and the prostrate spurge. So annuals, managing them has a lot to do with catching them early before they set seed and understanding which ones come at what time of the year. Perennials, once they're there, they're a little bit more challenging to deal with because they come back every year. So let's take a look at the most common ones. Wild violets. Now, we do have wild violets that are native plants, and that's fabulous. But just because something is native does not mean it's not weedy or aggressive or even invasive. And as pretty as these are, as a woodland flower, they aren't real pretty when they're in your lawn or on the golf course or anything like that, or when they're growing so thick that they outcompete some of the other perennials you might have in your landscape. So you see they have a heart-shaped leaf and a long stem, and then it goes back down to sort of a crown or center of the plant. And then if you've ever tried to pull them out, they have these very thick stems that are about as thick as the width of your finger that grow along the ground. So they grow and spread vegetatively that way, but they also produce seed. So they have multiple ways that they can reproduce. And they are evergreen to semi-evergreen in the landscape. So wild garlic and onion. Again, if you've ever mowed your grass and you have these, you know it immediately. So this actually looks kind of grassy. It's a very upright growing plant, forms these little clumps. But they tend to be a blue-green color, and the leaves tend to be, and stems tend to be round. And then if you are successful in pulling something up, you can see the little bulbs on the bottom. And the thing is, if you're pulling it up, you know that you've left some of those down in the ground and that this plant will be back. So if you have these and you're trying to like pull or dig them out, dig them and dig a bigger area around the clump and then throw the whole clump away. Don't try to knock off the soil or the mulch or anything like that. Of course, that means you're leaving divots all over your landscape, but that is one method. And generally, the reason that they're grouped together on my slide is because your management methods are pretty much the same, whether it's the garlic or the onion. I think if it's garlic, it's hollow stemmed. If it's onion, it's a solid stem. And then we have things like poison ivy. So here at the research center, we do have poison ivy in a group of or an area that's in wooded growing conditions. And of course, under those conditions, it gets up in the trees, it flowers, it creates seeds, and the birds eat them, and then they fly all over the rest of our research center and poop the seeds out. And so we find poison ivy very, very frequently in our landscapes, in our demonstration gardens, in our research plots. And it is something that most people are allergic to. If not, good for you. But most of us find that we have very dramatic allergic reactions, from rashes to itching, to other types of things. And so it's one that we definitely want to control. But if it causes that type of a problem, how do you even get close to control it without getting the rash from the oils? Because oils in the leaves, the stems, the flowers, the seeds, even the roots, the oils that are in the plant are what cause the allergic reactions. So it can grow as a creeping ground cover. It can grow as a small shrub, because over time the stem becomes woody, and then it can also grow as a vine up a tree. And take a look at the picture on the bottom right where it has done so, and the roots actually go into the bark to hold it on the tree. It is not a parasitic plant, so it's not feeding off of the tree, but the roots are in the bark to hold it as it climbs. And then if you look at the picture, you'll see the phrase leaves or leaflets of 3, leave it be, because each leaf is divided into 3 smaller leaflets. And you'll see sometimes it's a shiny dark green, sometimes it's a dull green color. Sometimes, like in the top left, the edges of the leaflets, there's no lobes or teeth. And if you look at the one in the bottom left, you'll see that there are some larger teeth on the leaves. So yeah, this is one, just kind of keep an eye out for it. Then we have yellow nut sedge. This is a true sedge. So as the saying goes, sedges have edges and rushes are round for the most part. So it does have a triangular stem. It has very angular leaves, very sharp points on the leaves. And even the seed head in the bottom slide picture, looks very sharp and pointed. If you try and pull it up, you will see in the upper right picture the roots that go out to support the plant, but then you'll also see the white runners. So these are underground stems. And then you'll also see those little round nutlets. So it spreads by seed, it spreads by underground runners, and then it also leaves these little nutlets in the ground. When you've got a weed that has that many different reproductive methods and it's very aggressive, it's really hard to use cultural or mechanical or biological control on it. You're pretty much left with chemical, which is herbicide. So we'll talk about some of those things in a minute. And then there's English ivy. So a well-intentioned, ornamental landscape plant that has actually become quite an aggressive and invasive weed in our landscapes. So typically the bottom left picture, that's what you see. It's growing along the ground. You've got the brighter green, newer growth, and the older green or darker green, older growth. The veins are very obvious. It's kind of got this lobed look to the leaf, almost with 3 larger triangular kind of lobes to it. In the bottom image, you see why it's aggressive, because everywhere a leaf comes out along that stem, it roots in. And so that helps it spread, it helps it exploit the resources, and it helps it stay in an area forming these dense thickets. If you look at the top picture, when English ivy climbs trees or structures, it reaches a certain height and the foliage changes to a leaf that doesn't have any lobes. And that's what's called the adult foliage. What we're most used to seeing is the bottom images, which are the juvenile foliage. When it gets to the height that it can create adult foliage, then you'll see the berries that form on it that the birds eat and then transport all over the place. And the problem with this weed and some of the other perennials that we've looked at, they tend to have a waxy coat on the leaves, which makes them kind of hard to control, especially if you're doing it with herbicides. All right, I didn't have a cutesy saying for the perennial weeds, and they are what they are. But we do need to take a minute and talk about the different levels of weediness. So Virginia does have and most states have an invasive weed list. And basically the things that make a plant labeled as an invasive is it's not something that's native. It's something that has come in from outside of the country, and it did not evolve in whatever ecosystem that it's in. It didn't co-evolve with the plants and the insects and the animals of that ecosystem, and it causes harm. So it can cause harm to our natural resources, like that Japanese stilt grass invading our woodland areas. It can cause economic harm, meaning it can interfere with growing crops and things like that. Or you could consider economic harm having weeds on your favorite golf course. And it can cause human health issues. So that would be something like the poison ivy, or if anybody paid any attention, last year, I think there was a lot of news coverage of the goat weed, which was fairly toxic. So it could be any one of these things that it causes harm to, or it could be a combination of things. Right now in Virginia, we have 90 plants on our invasive species list that is put out through the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. All you have to do is type Virginia invasive weed list and it'll come up for you. And they have been kind enough to take that list and sort it by coastal, Piedmont, and mountain parts of the state, so you know where it's invasive. And they have also categorized the plants as high, middle, and low invasiveness. And then, wow, we're kind of behind here. Maryland has 287 species on its list. If you look at other states, these numbers are a little high compared to other states, and that's because, again, we're mid-Atlantic. We have a lot of ports of entry, airports, shipping ports, so things coming into the country, and a lot of opportunity for invasives. There is also a group of plants called noxious weeds. This is a group of plants that the federal government, it's been recognized at the federal level, are causing major, major problems. And that's because, again, they're coming into the United States from other countries, and they are spreading across states. You know, it's one thing if something stays within a state. It's very different now if you're crossing state lines. And of course, weeds don't care. They don't know about our geographic boundaries. But then again, you know, they injure crops or outcompete other useful plants like native plants. They impact our livestock, poultry, or other agricultural crops and interests. They interfere with irrigation and navigation along waterways. They impact fish and wildlife resources. And again, they also impact public health. And most states have noxious weed lists, and there aren't a lot of plants on those lists, because if it is classified as a noxious weed, that means there is regulations governing how you manage and control it. And there's also funding for managing and controlling it. So what you see here is, you know, federal noxious weed. And if it's on a federal list, then chances are it's on your state noxious weed list. And that means that there is regulations that say you have to control these weeds. The invasive species, not so much. So let's talk management. And there's several different ways that you can manage weeds, and let's go through those. So one of the first ways is just prevent them from ever getting into your landscape. And this is done by interrupting their life cycle. And you can interrupt it in the early, the middle, or the late stages. But if you look at this life cycle here, if you look at something, a seed that is germinating, and we're going, start with the seed and go left, you can prevent that seed from ever germinating and growing by mulch, by planting dense canopy cover, by putting down a pre-emergent herbicide, whatever. You can, intercept the weed in the middle of its life cycle after it's germinated. Maybe you got there a little too late, but you're certainly there in the middle part of the life cycle, and you can interrupt it at that point before it sets seed. So if you can stop it from setting seed, then you will prevent the whole nother group of plants from potentially germinating and growing the next season. So prevention. You can mulch. We do recommend mulch, especially if you've got bare ground or big spaces between your ornamental plants. We do not recommend volcano mulch, which is what the two bottom pictures are. This is not good. And that is actually really harmful to the trees. So mulch needs to be generally 2 to 3 inches thick. There's a variety of types of mulches, both organic and inorganic, that you can use. And what it does is puts a layer there that if seed blows in, then that seed can't touch the soil, so it can't trigger the germination. Now, if you've got really old decayed mulch, that's not good. That's sort of an invitation for weeds to germinate. But the objective there is to, keep water around the root zone so that your plants establish quickly and can outcompete the weeds, and to keep the weed seeds from germinating either from above or below, because it can't germinate if it doesn't have light. So you can plant very densely to outcompete weeds. And this is a much better way to do a landscape than the top picture, which shows you a handful of individual plants surrounded by an ocean of sterile mulch. If you look at the picture on the bottom, they have planted spacing wise, so that the plants, when they grow and mature, the canopies fill in. And there is nowhere for weed seed to blow in, and nowhere for seed that's in the soil to germinate and be able to get to the light and grow. So it's about how you think about planting the plants the ornamental plants that you want in your landscape. And there are different planting patterns. You can go online, and if you know the square footage of the area and you know the size of the plant you want, you can play around with how close do I plant them, and does it make a difference in what pattern I plant them. We generally recommend that you do an offset pattern, which is the pattern on the right, an offset or a zigzag pattern, so that plant canopies can fill in quickly. If you do the square planting pattern, you probably need less plants, but if one plant dies or something, it leaves this huge hole that can't easily be filled in by the surrounding plants. Plus a pattern like that, it's really obvious when something dies because you've got a very symmetrical pattern. So we recommend the offset or zigzag spacing and planting pattern so that you get things filled in very quickly. You can also be creative and do things like burn them, either with hot water or with fire, like with this torch here. And so this is often a good option if you have weeds where you have like permeable paving, sidewalks, driveways, parking lots, things like that, because you can very easily, with burning, have collateral damage and hurt the plants that are adjacent to the weeds that you're trying to kill. But these are options. You can mechanically remove them or mechanically put pressure on them so that they never really develop and thrive in an area. And this could be cutting or mowing on a frequent basis. So if you look at the picture on the left, adjacent to the pathway, it is mowed at a shorter height than on the other side of that white dotted line. And then you can see that higher mowing heights allow different types of weeds to come in than if you mow it lower. You need to mow your turf based on what type you are growing, because there are significant differences in the heights that you mow at for warm season versus cool season. And you should be mowing at the correct height so that your grass is as healthy as possible. Because if you mow like fescues, ryegrass, bluegrass, these are your clumper cool season grasses. If you mow them, they generally should be mowed at 4 to 6 inches. If you mow them at the 2 to 3 inch height, and sometimes even a 1 inch height that the warm season, like zoysia, St. Augustine, Bermuda, are mowed at, then you have taken away a lot of the canopy on your cool season grasses and opened up areas in between the clumps that weeds can come into. So mowing is very important. The 5-fingered or 10-fingered method of pulling weeds out never goes out of style. But there are also a wide variety of implements that have been developed to mechanically remove weeds, all the way from little hand trowels to blades to digging forks and all kinds of cool, nifty little weed removal tools, and then all the way up to weed eaters. So you can remove the whole plant, or you can mow it down to help prevent it from developing seed. You can eat them. So if you want a niche side business, start renting out goats for weed control. There are companies that do this, and it's logical. If if you have an area that's just overrun, you put up a little fence, and the goats go in there and they eat it. Unfortunately, a lot of times they can't distinguish between ornamental plants that you want and then the weeds. They just eat it all. But it is a way, a non-chemical way to sort of get the weeds under control, and maybe to a level that then you can look at another method for dealing with them. Or maybe you bring the goats back as soon as the little weeds start to grow again, you bring the goats back. And if you keep at that long enough, eventually they won't grow back. We could eat them. So do you want a duckweed burger? There are guides out there, YouTube videos, all kinds of things about how to eat weeds. If you're lost in the wilderness, scavenge for your food or something. But a lot of times they are good sources of protein, and you never know. Maybe we become the next weed management option by eating our weeds. And then we get to herbicides. So there's a broad category called pesticides, and these are chemicals that are used to control all different types of pests. So you may have an insecticide if you're dealing with insects, or a rodenticide if you're dealing with, rats and things like that, or a fungicide if you're dealing with diseases. They had to be different, didn't they? And then you have herbicides, which are for dealing with plant problems. And under that title of herbicide, you have two types. You have a pre-emergent and you have post-emergent. So pre-emergent is just like it sounds. It is something that you put down prior to the weed germinating and growing. And what it does is, if you look at the red arrow there and see the red line, a pre-emergent goes down either as like a liquid spray or a granule that you spread, and then it's activated by water, and it forms this blanket over the soil surface. And weed seed that blows in can't germinate, and weed seed that's in the soil, they may germinate, but once they hit that herbicide blanket on the soil surface, it very quickly kills them. And you can put pre-emergents down around most ornamental plants and in some turf grasses. But what they do is form that blanket, and the seeds can't germinate. Now you can put a pre-emergent down and then maybe you need to go back into the area and plant something. Every time you poke a hole in that blanket, then there's an opportunity for the weed seeds to germinate and grow through that pre-emergent. A lot of your pre-emergents, they prevent either root or shoot growth or both. A lot of them are 3 to 4 month. So they tell you, okay, if you don't want crabgrass in your lawn, put down the pre-emergent this time of year when the forsythia is blooming, and that'll prevent the crabgrass from growing all spring. And then once you get in the summer, not a lot of it is germinating. So pre-emergent prevents the weeds from growing in the first place. Post-emergent is what you use when you are trying to deal with it after it is up and growing. Okay. Oops, we're having 70-degree temperatures in February. The seed have started to germinate because they think it's late spring. And, I've missed the window of opportunity there to put down a pre-emergent herbicide. They're up and going. So now what do I do? So there is a category of herbicides called post-emergent, meaning you're dealing with it post-germination. And you can break that category of herbicide down into 2 types, a translocated, sometimes called systemic, and a contact. So the translocated or systemic, this is one that you apply to the plant and the plant absorbs it, and then it moves throughout the entire plant system. So all the shoots and all of the roots, it goes wherever the xylem and phloem transport systems in the plant take the herbicide that has been absorbed into the plant. And so you'll see sometimes commercials say, kills roots and all. They're talking about one of these translocated types of herbicides. You have contact herbicides as well. So this is what some people say are like a burn down type of a situation. This herbicide only kills the plant tissue that it comes into contact with. So if you spray the plant and you miss a leaf, well, that leaf will stay green. It won't die. You really have to totally cover the plant if you're using a contact herbicide. And contact herbicides are better on your annuals. They're not so good on your perennials because you kill maybe the top of the plant, but you haven't killed the crown or the roots or the underground stems, and it just grows back. And oftentimes worse than it was to begin with. So understanding your plant and its life cycle, understanding if you are going to use an herbicide, what types of herbicide, when you would apply which type of herbicide is important. And then herbicides can be applied in different ways. You can spray it on, you can wipe it on, which is really good for plants that have a waxy coat on the leaf because that smears it on the plant. And then it's more likely to get absorbed or be effective, as opposed to spraying something and it beads up and rolls off the leaf. And then you can do a drench, which is like either drench the plant itself or drench the soil, and the roots will take up the herbicide and kill the plant. So sometimes it's not all about what you're applying, it's more about how you apply it. There are a lot of resources out there to help you. So what I would caution you is vet your resources. It's one thing to look at somebody's blog, which they're telling you about their experiences and it's their opinion on weeds. It's something else to look at a resource like a university or an extension office, or like something like this presentation here, because Cindy is very careful about vetting the speakers so that it is mostly research-based information that is going out, so that it's unbiased and it's not a point in time, but something that has been tested over time that works. So look for different resources. A lot of your universities have weed identification websites or pages, and certainly your extension offices are set up to talk with you about weed management, to help you identify the weeds that you may have. And they also have a lot of resources on recommendations on how to deal with the weeds. So very good resources there. There are some books out there, if you like books, often through Cooperative Extension or like the Weeds of the Northeast. The folks that are authors there are scientists at various universities that deal with weed management research. So there are some of those types of things. There are posters, there's online galleries of weeds to help you identify it. And that's important because that's the first step to managing them, is identifying what you're actually dealing with. And of course, in our new sort of technological age here, where we all walk around with pocket-sized computers, there are things like apps that are out there that help you. You can take a picture, upload it, and it will pretty much tell you what that plant is. But there's also information at garden centers. A lot of your lawn and landscape companies have websites that have information. You can go to product manufacturer websites for information, and you can just Google, how do you manage dandelions, on the internet, and Google will give you an answer. But again, just kind of look where the information is coming from to make sure that you're not going to try something that's going to, cost you money, cost you time, cost you labor, and in the end be ineffective. All right, so as Cindy mentioned at the opening, weeds can tell us some things about our landscapes. So, for instance, chickweed likes to grow in situations where there's high nitrogen, and that's probably part of the reason it's one of the biggest problems in your turf grass. Things like plantains or plantains, depending on how you care to pronounce it, can tell you that you have compacted soils. And that should be dock, not cock. Should also be able to tell you things like maybe the soils are poorly drained, because dock is typically called a ditchweed. It likes to grow in wet situations. But remember, weeds are opportunistic. They'll take advantage of any opportunity that you give them, and they're generalists. They are adaptable and flexible and will grow under a wide range of conditions. And that's what gives them those competitive advantages. So all of these weeds, they may tell you this about the soil, but you may find them in places, that aren't compacted or poorly drained or have high nitrogen levels. So, they can tell you some things, but it's not always exactly a reliable type of a science. Your soil tests are the best way to understand what's going on with your soils, and maybe a test will confirm if your pH is out of balance, or you've got high salt concentrations, or your nutrients are out of balance, and maybe tweaking something off of based on a soil test would be one method to manage weeds. Maybe cut down on the nitrogen, and that might help manage the chickweed, or alleviate the compaction, and that might cut down on the infestation of the plantains. So soil testing is highly recommended and could be a good tool to help in your management program. So let's take a look at some quick scenarios here. Dandelions in my lawn, most people don't like them. It's a broadleaf in a grass situation, which is relatively easy to manage. When I was growing up, my grandmother gave me a penny for every dandelion I went out in the lawn and dug up. However, if you've got dandelions like this in your lawn, I don't know, maybe change your perspective. Maybe that's a lot prettier than the grass. So it's easier to take a broadleaf out of a grass because they're easy to identify. And if you're doing something chemically, you can differentiate between a broadleaf plant and a grass plant. It's not so easy to take a grassy weed out of a grassy crop. All right, so having just said that, here's annual bluegrass in a grass. So does it make a difference if this is a weed in your fescue lawn, which is cool season, versus your zoysia grass, which is warm season? And the answer is yes, because your warm season grasses aren't very tolerant of herbicides. So this may be a situation where you need to prevent it from seeding, or spot treat it in the fall when it first germinates and starts growing, or maybe put down some sort of a pre-emergent versus a post-emergent herbicide to prevent it from growing. So this is a case where you have to know not only what weeds you're dealing with, but which type of grass you're trying to grow, and then what your best management strategy is. Read the herbicide label. Can't say that strongly enough, because they will have lists on there of the weeds that they control, but also they will have information about whether or not you can use that herbicide on a specific type of turf grass.
And Laurie, this is, unfortunately, we've hit time.
Okay.
And so I'm going to have to go ahead and say thank you for what you shared with us. But I'm very grateful for what you shared with us. So I love that. So there you
Almost
go.
made it.
That looks like Cousin It. But what you shared is, I think the most important thing is learning how to identify what you have, because there's so many things. We were talking about lesser celandine at the beginning of our conversation today, and it's so important to know what the difference between lesser celandine and the native celandine are. So, you know, to be able to look at that and tell, and how you do that, you could look at some of the resources, some of the images, but I think the strongest way to do it is to work with your extension office in your area, because we have people from all over the United States. So contact them. You might get Laurie.
Right. Yeah, they generally know which weeds are most problematic in their areas.
Right. And stilt grass is my least favorite, but I want to recommend to everyone, please identify them. Please look into your options. And you said it best. Please take information from reliable sources. There's a lot of information out there that might not do any harm to you or your garden, but might be ineffective. And that's one thing. But there are a lot of information sources out there that are not as reliable, and they may actually hurt you or your garden. So please take note of that. And Laurie, thank you for this, for our viewers with all your questions. I wrote them down. Most of these answers can be, or most of these questions can be answered by your extension office. Please contact them. Laurie has done a great job of sharing information for Maryland and Virginia, but all over the United States, there are people just like Laurie that will be able to help you with your problems. And realize that nurseries still sell things as long as we're going to buy them, and as long as they can make money from them. They're going to sell some of these things that you may not want in your garden.
Yes, make sure it's not a weed that you're taking home.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you, Laurie, and thank you for all that have joined us. It was a terrific presentation. Tell your staff members that you get an A+. Okay. Okay. Thanks. Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.